welcome everyone to our presentation on going from LMS to ecosystem, going beyond implementation. I'm Carol Anyking, Director of Learning and Development for NCI Building Systems.
And I'm Debbie Richards. I'm the Senior Analyst for Learning and Development at NCI Building Systems.
NCI builds metal buildings. You may have seen them around and not even seen our brand name on them, but we build everything from churches to schools to office buildings and major NFL stadiums. Our footprint is basically all over the United States, and we also have offices and manufacturing facilities in Mexico and Canada. You can tell by this quote from Brad Wendell that NCI is all about learning opportunities. So that's the great news, is that learning and development is a key part of our culture and very tied into our core values. And that's one thing that helps you get beyond just a system and into an ecosystem. And this quote from Jack Welch is always great too, because one of the things that has made our learning and development implementation so successful is that we are all continuous learners, and that's what this quote's really speaking to. So from the boardroom to the manufacturing shop floor, we are all learning more together.
So let's talk a little bit about what a learning ecosystem is. To us, the learning ecosystem is a combination of technologies and all the support resources that are available to help your learners learn within the environment. Now, whether it's formal learning, like taking an online class or an instructor-led class, or if it's informal learning where people find out some information on YouTube or they have a casual conversation, those are all things that have to do with learning. And we believe that learning happens everywhere and it happens at any time, and it all should be a part of your corporate learning ecosystem. For us, learning is made out of four main pillars. These include people, the people who are involved in the learning, the content, whether it be content that you've received from your subject matter experts or that you've brought in from external resources, processes and standards from within your organization, and finally the technology that you're utilizing within your environment. We love this quote from Stephen Foreman: "Create environments where people can learn on their own or from one another." And so you can see in this graphic where we talk about some of the different types of learning and how they all work together. You can advance with talent management. You use performance support to enable performance for employees. You can research information through knowledge management. You'll have access to experts who can help you through the consultative information they provide. We have a lot of ways to share information, and we do that through collaboration and social networking. And finally, we have structured learning, and that's where the LMS falls into play, where we are training our learners on specific applications.
So the first question we had to ask ourselves is, where do we even begin? And when I came into my role about 2.5 years ago, we were trying to redefine the entire learning and development strategy for our company. We wanted to be more proactive, and we wanted to stay abreast of any technology developments out there. And we thought about the right time to start, given that there are lots of competing priorities out there. And then we realized there's really never a good time to start. So we just went ahead and began the implementation of our learning management system. That was a foundational piece to our strategy, having one place where everyone can go, not only to get their training records, but to find all kinds of learning and development opportunities. We wanted to make sure that was in place. And the first thing I did was, thankfully, contact Debbie and bring her in, because her expertise really made the impossible much more possible. Also, as we started, we were really overwhelmed looking at all the different LMS systems out there. And it's very difficult to compare apples to apples. And I thought some of the bigger names would be out of our price range or just much more complicated than we needed, and really wasn't sure that I needed a big name, so to speak. But since we had the relationship that we do with Skillsoft, we decided to talk to SumTotal, and we ended up selecting them. And so sometimes what you think is going to be the more complicated or more expensive solution ends up being the best, the most economical, the most functional. And so I would say to any of you that are looking at doing this, make sure that you keep your mind open and look at a lot of different vendors. And you never know what you might find out there that you weren't expecting. The other thing that I would ask you to keep in mind is that in this industry, there are a lot of people who resell content and resell entire learning management systems. For instance, I had people who wanted to sell me Skillsoft product through their company, but I already had a direct relationship with Skillsoft, so I didn't need to do it that way. So be aware of who's created the content, and that's always a good question to ask in your search, is where did you get your content from, and is it consistent across the board, and is it something that I need to buy from you, or are you more of a middleman or middlewoman in the process? But after I brought in Debbie, she really took us through the implementation, and she's still here with us 2.5 years later as we consider what's next in this journey. So when I brought Debbie in, we talked about what the system needed to do, what the business's priorities were, really how do we connect learning with the organization needs. We are not trying to be a smorgasbord of every single training you could ever imagine. We're trying to really target our initiatives, our learning, the way you access learning. We're trying to get it very streamlined and really eliminate the complexity in all of this. So talking about just how would you approach such a change, who needs to be involved, how do we get them involved early, what kinds of things cause people problems out there. And for me, working in a manufacturing firm, ultimately, whatever solutions we came up with have to be very functional and easy for people who aren't used to being in front of a computer all day. If we're going to pull them off the shop floor where they may be welding or putting together big pieces of steel, we've got to make sure that we can make learning fun, engaging, and easy and efficient for them. So those were the things we were trying to accomplish originally. This is a snapshot of our current learning management system, and it may look really simple. That's most certainly by design. Again, we want people who aren't even on computers that much to be able to log in, click a few buttons. We want to make it very current and easy, just like if they were on an app on their phone. In fact, we're looking at adding app access right now. So we've got their dashboard, their courses, their transcripts so they can keep track of all their learning, and then of course the icons across the top provide more advanced search features.
So here's a little bit about what we feel a successful learning management system implementation looks like. So when you're starting out, of course, you've got to be focused on the business goals. What are the drivers? What are the initiatives that all the different business units are looking at? You can't operate in a silo and assume what people want. We also looked at data, and we thought in terms of, are we going to bring in legacy data into the system, or are we going to start from day one and have our data created there? And we decided not to bring in the legacy data. We had it accessible so that it was readily available if needed, but we started fresh with our LMS.
And that probably cut a lot of time off the process too.
It did. Thinking in terms of system integration, having the conversation with the other departments and divisions around tools and things that were going to flow information into the system, and thinking about, was there anything that we needed to flow out of the LMS? And then finally, having a good handle on governance and documentation as we moved through our implementation. We wanted to make sure we had everybody on the bus. So we looked at the different people that had to be involved. These included stakeholders. We wanted to share with them the what's in it for me. We had our IT and legal folks involved to make sure that we were in compliance with everything we needed, our data owners, and then our core implementation team. We thought about the Big Bang Theory for learning management system, where you basically turn it on and tell everybody, here it is, go ahead, do it. And then we decided to pilot the system instead in slow, steady migration. So you'll see kind of a trend where we went by different departments. We had a small pilot group, then we grew and grew and grew throughout the organization.
And one thing I would say about a pilot too is that it's the same level of implementation, whether you are piloting for 300 or 5,000 or 25,000. So it's not a pilot in the sense of, oh, let's just spend a little money and have a little group of the business do it. You will go through the same implementation effort regardless of how many users you have on day one. But that said, it works a lot better to just keep the user population small and have them come alongside you testing before you roll it out to thousands of people.
And if you look at our core implementation team with the different people that we had involved, our LMS support team, our HR team, our IT team, we were able to identify some key things through our pilot that we had to work on. And not all of these had to do with technology or our learning management system. It had to do with our infrastructure. So with our IT, thinking about upgrading machines, changing out some of the way things happened and the way people worked were all part of that as well.
So in looking at all of the processes involved, once we had the business case and we picked our vendor and knew what data we wanted to put in, we had to really think about what to do first, second, and third. And even though, like Debbie said, we had all these key players involved, we realized we had to challenge every assumption. For instance, IT from a does it work standpoint might say, oh yes, everything's ready to go. It's whitelisted, all the sites are working, and it works great in their office environment. And so they might give you the green light, but then you realize that you've got people in the field with computers that are decades old. I'm sure that wouldn't happen to you, but we had people who had really old computers, so it's no wonder they couldn't operate the technology. So we had to be as basic and deliberate as saying, you need to buy a new computer if you haven't gotten one in the last 10 years or so. So all of those things played into how we managed the system integration.
So here are some of the things that we did as part of our configuration. So again, we're being very consistent and methodical. We're looking at user profiles, we're looking at our admin roles, things that we have to customize. What are we going to be bringing in as far as courses? What are the competencies? What notifications are people going to get from emails? What are the reports that we need? And then thinking about what happens next. And this is an ongoing process. I mean, we are still tweaking and making changes to these things, and we implemented the baseline LMS 2.5 years ago. Some of the things have helped us with SumTotal is when we started our implementation, they were really good about helping us with processes. So this is an example of a project plan for our implementation, showing you all the detailed pieces that we used to work through our implementation and where we thought we might have speed bumps, and all the things that we needed to do, down to the UAT testing and to deploying onto our staging server and then finally onto our production server. And they were also really good about helping us with other templates. So here's an example of a security roles worksheet that we use to define all of our different security roles. And we locked things down at the very beginning. I mean, we locked down a lot of what our users could do, our admins, our managers, so that we could make sure that they were able to do the immediate things they needed. And as they grew and in their knowledge, then we adjusted those security roles. And we still go in and adjust and work with these to this day. And so from a standpoint of migration, looking at bringing in our user data, our course data, and any kind of testing, we are still doing that to this day. So we have have an increased user data population coming in. We are always refreshing and bringing new content and testing all of these things as we bring them in. It doesn't stop with implementation.
That's the truth.
The other thing is understanding your governance, making sure that your systems are kept evergreen and you're constantly updating that information. You're being very agile in documenting procedures and processes, and then as you work through any kind of customizations and integration. And here's an example of one thing that we did. So we knew after our initial implementation launch that we were going to have IT provide help desk support to our users. But we had to give them the script and the FAQ information on how to respond, and have them as part of our pilot test so they would understand how the system worked. We also wrote an escalation process and gave them some examples. So for example, how do you recover a password, or how do you handle pop-up blockers? And as we've gone through our implementation and our LMS journey, then we keep on adding to this information as well.
And we're always looking at what's next, because as Debbie said, you've got to make sure you're looking beyond the implementation at all the changes that could happen. NCI is a company that has grown through mergers and acquisitions, so it's possible that at any given time, we may be adding a few thousand more users. We also have extended needs across the enterprise. The more we got our users familiar with the learning management system, the more they started coming to us with requests and concerns and ideas, and that's exactly what we want. And we want to be that central focal point. So we are constantly looking at how do we build something out. We're trying to make sure that we're very deliberate not to do a bunch of one-off training implementations. So if one group needs it, we'll always ask, could this apply to others? If so, how? How do we make sure that what we're doing here is consistent with everything else we're trying to do in our strategy? So it's a balance of being proactive and also being reactive to the needs of the business. And it's going to continue that way, so we're happy that we have a model of how to deal with it, and that's really what we're talking about when we talk about an ecosystem. So it goes way beyond just the LMS itself.
Yeah, and so we have some health checks as part of our processes. We feel like that's an indicator of a healthy learning ecosystem. It gives you lots of opportunities to improve and tweak what you're doing, and we are constantly evaluating and looking at what we're doing and seeing if we need to make adjustments to our methodology. Here's just a roadmap of what we do. Whenever we do anything, we start off with our planning. We kind of work through our configuration and integration components. We migrate that out to whatever system platform we're using. We do a lot of testing before we go live, and then we tweak that afterwards. So we're constantly doing this cycle, and that's part of our ecosystem as well.
Mm-hmm. And I would say we don't just do it for our online training, we do it for instructor-led as well, and we pilot that training to make sure all of our messages are lining up together.
Certainly. A look at our 5-year plan. So starting off in 2016 when we started our planning to our system implementation, and we have a lot of our things that are planned in sync with our LMS provider SumTotal, so that we're looking at their rollouts, their LMS updates, and we're mapping to that. So we know what they have in the works, if there's updates that are going to affect our users. We have some of our own roadmap items, like we had a big integration with our HRS system, and just recently we implemented single sign-on on our LMS, and we have constantly are doing ongoing maintenance. So this is a simplified roadmap of what we do, but of course there are a lot of other elements that are involved as well. We are also looking at how can we expand and what things are right for our organization. So there are a lot of emerging technologies that are out there in the market. People are looking at social learning, content creation, micro-learning, gamification, mobile learning, and xAPI. And we know those capabilities exist in SumTotal, but they may not be right for our user today, our learners, but they may be something that we'll consider. So we're pulling out of that stack. Right now we're getting ready to look at mobile learning to see how we can integrate that into our system. And we're also looking at the other parts of the SumTotal offering to see if any of those fit with our organization for our current needs and then our organization as it grows. So we look at those other pieces to see whether or not they're a good fit. They may be a good fit, but they may not. But we have to understand, if they aren't, what is the implication there and what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I think it's important to select a vendor for whatever systems you have, a vendor who will grow with you, and a system that can grow and expand as your ideas and your implementation grows and expands too. So Now we are talking a lot more about how do we tie learning to talent. We couldn't have even had that conversation 2 or 2.5 years ago. So it's very exciting, and it's good to know that we have a system that can scale with our ideas.
So speaking of that, we are looking to scale, and there may be
Yes,
some
we are.
things coming up in the horizon for us as well. Here's just a graphic around the xAPI component, which we are looking at as well, because we think learning happens everywhere, as we said earlier. And so we are looking at how can we track all that information, and how can we deal with the data that matters, because with some of these new learning systems, you can collect all this data, but you need to be able to understand what to do with it once you have it. So what's important for the business, and what's important for L&D.
Yeah, and we don't want to be mandating that people have to go through us for training. We want to be seen as a resource where they would choose to go through us. But we're also thinking of ways that if they do go out and they have their own learning experience, they can log it in the system so it's part of their permanent record. So that's our way of also seeing how are people learning out there. So
Yeah, and it goes back to that philosophy that we talked about earlier about creating environments where people can learn on their own and they can learn from each other. And that's what we believe.
So we have a lot of resources that help us stay on top of the trends, and this is invaluable. We always go to the conference for our technology partners, SumTotal and Skillsoft. And so this slide's an example of one of their conferences, and we get so much information, networking and learning from others out there who are going through similar things as we are. So definitely take time to step away from your office and go out there and make sure you're staying on top of not only what your system's doing, what content is out there, but also what can you learn and how can you grow and change. This is an example of an online community through SumTotal. They have office hours, so when they have major releases, when they have things going on that people have questions about, they'll have office hours for us to be able to connect with them. So this community is a wonderful resource, and it enables us to go further than we could on our own.
And if we have support issues, we go to the community first to see if somebody else has had a similar issue so that we can look to get those answers from them. And then if we can't find the answer, then we go to our vendor to look for support from them. But a lot of times we can find the information in the communities, not only in SumTotal, but in Skillsoft as
too.
well.
Yep, so there's a screenshot of the Skillsoft client community as well. So lessons learned. Of course, we have lots of lessons learned. Things were not always rosy all along the way. The biggest thing is you want to make sure you pull everyone in who's going to be involved early and that you take nothing for granted. I gave the example earlier about the equipment. You've got to just go back to the drawing board and make sure from point A to point Z you have everything lined up. The other thing is always making sure that we understand the change management that goes around any of our changes. I've found that a lot of organizations think they know how to manage change well, but their idea of a change is, here you go, here's a new user guide, here's a new system, figure it out. And we want it to be better than that. And so even if it's something as simple as changing to single sign-on, like we did this weekend, we had an entire change management effort in place just to make sure we communicated everything that was going on. People knew when the system would be down, when it would be back up, how to log in, all those kinds of things. We wanted to make sure that we didn't take anything for granted. And what started as a 6-month implementation has definitely turned into a 3 to 5 year journey. So the more you do, the bigger conversations you can have about what's possible. So that's been really, really exciting. And with that, we are finished. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.